we are going to be sharing a little bit about feedback fueling growth for this month's Coffee Connect. So, again, welcome. We're going to start with some introductions. So, I am Jill Gunther, Regional Support Lead for Region 2. So, I serve ESUs 2, 3, and then Omaha Public Schools. And I'm going to let Amber introduce herself next.
I'm Amber Scott. I'm the Integrated Support Specialist for Region 2. So I work alongside Jill at ESU 2, 3, and OPS. And we actually have the privilege of sharing an office as well.
My name's Brooke Gabers. I'm the Region 3 support lead for Nebraska MTSS, so I serve districts in ESUs 1, 7, and 8, kind of the northeast corner of the state.
And I am Sarah Gentry. I am from Region 5, which is ESUs 13, 15, and 16 on the western end of the state. I serve as the integrated support specialist out here.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Just a couple quick reminders. So we do record our Coffee Connects so that we can upload them to the media library. So that will be available for you guys as well. And then we will also be dropping just the PDF of the slides in the chat for you guys. All right, so to start off with our welcoming inclusion activity, just really around that topic of thinking about feedback and kind of how we like to receive feedback, maybe even thinking about how we like to give feedback as well. We would like for you to imagine that you tried something new and it didn't maybe go quite as you had planned. Which response would help you the most? So we have a few options here. We have A, maybe it's a quick, just private message, or maybe it's a quick private email just to kind of let you know. Maybe it's B, a shout out in a group setting. C, maybe more of a one-on-one conversation where we can kind of talk through some things. D, written notes with specific suggestions that I can revisit. E, someone modeling or maybe showing me what they're talking about or what they're meaning. Or F, time to reflect first and then follow up later. So a few things in the chat. Thank you, everybody. So yes, reflection, I would agree as well. That's kind of one of my go-tos as well. Like to be able to have that time to kind of reflect. So maybe like a combination. I'm seeing some like combinations of some C's, some D's, some maybe a little bit of everything, depending on the situation. Lots of reflection. Maybe some more written notes. I like that as well. So just some ways to just kind of think through, like, what is it that you feel like benefits you the most when you're thinking about, receiving that feedback, but also reflecting on how do you typically give feedback to your students? Might even think if you're a leader or administrator, how you're providing that feedback to your staff as well. So thank you for participating in that. We appreciate that. All right, moving on from our welcoming inclusion activity, just a few reminders here. So we do have our Padlet that we continue to add different resources to. So we have a column with some different resources that we'll be sharing throughout today around feedback. We have some just additional resources, maybe from some previous Coffee Connects, some things that are available on our Nebraska MTSS website. And then we do also have our previous Coffee Connect recordings located there as well, but they're also available on our media library. Just a reminder there, when you click on the Padlet link, we do have a password, so it's all caps MTSS. All right, we always love to start off with a quick little quote. So this one from Brene Brown. So feedback is not just how we grow, it's really how we connect. And hopefully you'll really kind of see that theme throughout today. Really thinking about that building of relationships and kind of how we make those connections and reflecting on how much it can really help us grow as individuals, but also really helping our students and our staff grow as well. bringing in those 4 essential elements, we would love for you guys just to kind of reflect both on the essential elements, and on the next slide, we'll talk through kind of those SEBL skills that we always kind of bring in and provide those reminders on as well. But really thinking about that feedback, fueling growth, and each of these essential elements here. So bringing in that database decision making, kind of how we're using data to maybe make decisions, really bringing in that shared leadership piece, that teaming piece, that importance of communication and collaboration, but really kind of thinking about how each of these different essential elements and the pieces that really go into each of the essential elements really are a part of feedback, and how really kind of layering on some of those supports when we're thinking about the feedback as well can be beneficial. And then here, the SEBL Skills Star. So you may be familiar with this, but broken down by those 5 skill areas. So self-awareness, self-management, problem solving, relationships, and then that pro-social behavior. And so what we've done here is just kind of broken down a few of those skills that really are encompassed within each of those 5 categories. Obviously, not an end all be all list, but really kind of gets us thinking about what are some of those skills that fall within self awareness? What does that mean? And again, as we go through our time together this morning, thinking about how feedback and how each of these SEBL skills is really so important for feedback as well. It's really an important tool that we can use to teach all of these SEBL skills as well. So it's really part of that just feedback being that overall social, emotional, behavioral learning experience. If you've heard us talk through restorative practices and really thinking about the social discipline window, doing with students, how can we do with students when it comes to feedback? Really thinking about, each of those skills that fall within those categories. And what does that mean when we're really trying to do with students? So again, would love for you guys to kind of reflect on those essential elements and those SEBL skills as we go through today. All right, so starting with just our definition of what is feedback. We kind of gathered a variety of different definitions, but we really kind of landed on this one here. So really thinking about how we're defining feedback, and it's really that information sent back to the source to really work to influence future actions. Okay. So that is kind of what we landed with today. Really kind of thinking about how we describe feedback. And we loved that piece, bringing in that influence piece of really how we're using that feedback, how we're sending it off to be able to influence future actions. And I am going to turn it over to Brooke for our next section.
Perfect. So now that we have kind of that generic definition of what is feedback, we want to dive deeper into this question of what kind of feedback then fuels growth for students. So first, our feedback should be delivered as soon as possible after student responses. We want to make sure that it's really timely with the instruction. Feedback should be specific and tied directly to students' actions. Anita Archer tells us that this type of feedback helps ensure high rates of success and reduces the likelihood of students practicing errors. Additionally, we want feedback to support learning and improvement, meaning that it's tied directly to the goals or objectives of the lesson. And then we also want it to be constructive in nature, meaning that it's giving kids the right type of guidance so that they can make adjustments to work towards those goals. Finally, we want feedback to be respectful and positive to keep students engaged and maintain their dignity throughout the lesson. We also know that feedback can come in a couple different forms. The first form of feedback would be affirmative or praising a student's correct response. For example, in an American history course, the instructor might provide immediate and specific affirmative feedback during work time that might address behavior, something that sounds like, "Thank you for being responsible by getting to work right away." Feedback could also be informative or corrective in nature to address an incorrect response. Here, the feedback should be delivered with an appropriate and encouraging tone, and more focus should be given to the correct response. Ultimately, we want it to end with the student giving the correct response as well. An example might sound like a teacher addressing a student by saying, "It should be, 'I went to get some ice cream,' Remember, you need to use the past tense verb when it already happened. Sometimes a teacher may also need to provide a reset and redirect students after an off-topic response. So as we look at some of these benefits of constructive and corrective feedback, we wanted to note that we know that this evidence-based practice is beneficial for all students. It's also beneficial for adults, but we know that some of the students who benefit the most from this type of feedback is students with learning disabilities, attention difficulties, or those acquiring English as a second language, as well as students who might be developing some foundational skills. Another important note that research tells us is that we can improve behavior by 80% just by pointing out what one person is doing correctly. And even though we as adults might know that we can improve behavior by labeling it with behavior-specific praise and using constructive and corrective feedback, we still typically only use it about 10% of the time. Some of those benefits of this evidence-based practice include increasing motivation and efforts towards the task, boosting confidence, as well as building that sense of belonging. And then this practice, we also know that it helps students develop skills, gain an understanding, and build skills of independence, as well as encouraging behaviors that we want to see more of. So next, we want to just do kind of a quick check for understanding and practice identifying some quality feedback. So we have 4 scenarios in this next section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the scenario, and then we want to have those of you who are on the Zoom with us just kind of engage dropping in the chat. We've got 3 choices for each scenario. So after reading the scenario, you're going to determine which of the 3 choices would best move the student's learning forward. So we'll go ahead and start with scenario number 1. The student has a clear main idea in their response, but they didn't provide any supporting evidence with their answer. Which piece of feedback do you think would move the student's learning forward the best? Do you think it would be saying, nice job, your writing is clear? Would it be B, you have a clear main idea, try adding more detail? Or C, your main idea is clear, add one piece of evidence from the text to support it? Perfect. I see a couple responses in the chat there. We can pretty much throw away answer A, right? We know that it's affirming. They're telling the student, nice job, but it's pretty empty in terms of the type of response that it is. Option B is an okay response. It really tells us what the issue is, but it's pretty vague. C is the best option that's here. It's more specific, and it gives the student some actionable things that they can do to improve their response. Let's jump to scenario 2. In this scenario, the student got the correct answer, but they didn't show their work. Which feedback do you think would move the student's learning forward? Would it be A, correct, nice work? B, make sure you show your work next time? Or C, you got the right answer, show your steps so someone else can follow your thinking? Perfect. We see really similar to the last responses. B versus C, they feel very close, right? But C adds a little bit more purpose to what the student's doing. In scenario 3, we have a student who gives a general answer, but again, they don't cite the textual evidence. Which response would you choose? A, be more specific. B, that's a strong idea. What part of the text supports it? Or C, that makes sense. Can you add more detail from the text? Perfect. I see a couple responses here. I think this one's a little bit more tricky than some of the last ones. Both B and C sound like decent responses here. C, it's okay, still a little bit vague. B kind of invites more of that student-led thinking. The student gets to dive a little bit deeper into the text. What part of the text supports it? We're kind of inviting them to take on their own interpretation there, right? Let's do this last scenario here. Number 4, the student is working on a research project and they have copied information directly from a website without paraphrasing. I'm sure that we've never seen a student do this before. Which type of feedback might you give to the student who's pulled the information directly from the website? Would you say, A, I see where you found strong information. Try putting this idea into your own words. What does it mean to you? B, be careful, don't copy from the internet. Or C, you should put this in your own words instead of copying. Perfect. I see a couple A's down there in the chat. We do know that A would be the best response here. It's affirmative. It invites the student to think a little bit deeper. We're asking, what does it mean to you? Try putting it in your own words. We're giving that really concrete direction. B is corrective, but it's pretty vague. And then C, it does give a little bit clearer of an expectation, but it's still a bit of a directive there. So we know that A would be the best response. Thank you all for engaging in the practice with us before we move on to the next part.
Thanks, Brooke. So now we're going to talk about the elements of quality feedback, right? We've gone through sorting some of the impactful versus less impactful. Now we're going to really deepen our understanding and identify some of those key elements that come when thinking about giving feedback. So the first one is really thinking about how we can combine that feedback within our instruction. So it's important that we think about how feedback and instruction should work together seamlessly. When we're planning our instruction, we have it really sequenced with some intentional checkpoints during that learning so that we can make sure our students are really understanding things and gathering evidence of where they're at in their learning. We can use that to then further plan or further explain or really think about where our students are at in general. We also use effective feedback to follow right after instruction, as we know. So if the students are not showing any or just partial understanding, then providing feedback might not be the best use of our time. It might not be the most effective. That's really thinking about when we need to provide that for further teaching. Hattie and Timperley quote, "A simple clue that a student's work is not ready for feedback is that you can't find any legitimate success feedback to offer. When the work doesn't demonstrate any understanding, don't give feedback, reteach instead." So I think that just continues that further thought process of being sure that students are getting components of the learning and giving feedback only when we feel like they have some confidence. Otherwise, we really need to dive into that reteach. There's also a really important element of not only getting feedback from the teacher, but engaging in peer feedback and self-assessment. That's really thinking about how we can engage deeper in the learning and in the instruction at different levels, because we know it's important that students are able to explain it to others. Finally, they shouldn't just receive that feedback, they should be able to use it and put it into action right away. When we're thinking about the instruction component, we should be really intentional with thinking about what action they can do moving forward. Next, we want to think about focusing our feedback on that learning intentions and success criteria. Okay, so we want to be really explicit with this. First, students really need to understand, what am I learning? So that learning intention, and what does success look like? That success criteria. And without that clarity, feedback becomes confusing or kind of meaningless to the student in general. And we need to limit our feedback to these and attend to the features every now and again. So when we're thinking about all the other elements, yes, we want to talk about them, but we really just want to zone in on those explicit learning intention and success criteria. We always want to prioritize our feedback, so address the most important needs first. And we're wanting to limit that feedback to 2-3 specific recommendations linked to that learning goal, and adjust the feedback based on those individual students' needs and readiness and their learning preferences. We talked about earlier in our welcoming inclusion how we all like to get feedback a little bit differently. And so that's one way to think about our students as well, is how are they going to get that feedback and what might they appreciate most. One student might want a ton of feedback where other students might be really overwhelmed by it. And we want to be really adaptive to that. We also want to think about how we're not zoning in on certain elements like presentation, quality, surface areas, and giving tons and tons of information about spelling and neatness and effort. Even though we know these are goals we have for our students, we just want to ensure that we're prioritizing what is most important. And we want to think about, what are the goals, what progress is being made towards the goal, and what needs to be undertaken to make better progress. So we're trying not to mark errors without making improvement suggestions too. That leans right back into that first one when we're talking about how it needs to lean into the instruction and be really actionable. Brooke also talked about this a little bit in thinking about how we need to intervene quickly. Timing matters a ton when it comes to when we're giving feedback. Feedback is really powerful when it happens during that learning and not just at the end. So when we think about it, we want it to follow the learning, but then when they go through those action steps of doing what's next, we want to be ensuring that they're doing it correctly and giving that feedback. If we wait too long, students may practice those mistakes and misunderstandings, and they become habits, which is what we're really trying to avoid. That's where that idea that comes in that practice doesn't make perfect, but practice makes permanent, right? When we're giving them that practice and we're giving them really good feedback and ensuring they're doing it right, that's going to make it a more permanent habit. Whereas if we don't give it and they're still continuing that practice, it might give permanent bad behaviors or things that we don't want to see within their learning. So, what should we do? We should be really intentional about planning those check-ins and giving that real-time feedback and thinking about using that formative assessment really intentionally within our learning and in our teaching and thinking about how we can really address those needs. Another key idea is that we want to keep that feedback manageable. That ties right back into thinking about the learning intentions and the success criteria. We want to focus on one or two improvements, maybe, that they can respond to quickly and that they can really learn from in alignment with those learning goals. If we give them too many, it becomes overwhelming, and then they're not actually learning, they're just correcting the mistakes the teacher wants to see. So we really want to ensure that we're catching them early and giving them correct feedback, not just after the learning is over. We also want to help our students really ensure that they are engaging in that thinking. So when we give feedback that doesn't do much thinking or give them thought process, they're not taking ownership of it. They're not really doing anything for themselves to promote their learning. It just becomes on the teacher. So when we think about our feedback, we're thinking about how it's actually improving the learning, especially when the teacher is doing all the thinking and the student just fixes or copies, it's not going to promote that learning. For example, if we were to say, fix this sentence or correcting it for them, it doesn't require much thinking. Whereas when we're really specific and we're giving them feedback that makes them think deeply, they're able to process what they're being asked and apply that learning. So we're really shifting from that telling mentality to the questioning. So some examples of this might be, what could you change to make this a complete sentence? Or how could you make this more descriptive? When we ask them those questions, they have to think through all the components that make a good sentence, and then they're able to write more intentionally and think through, wow, okay, I know that a complete sentence is going to have all of these details in it, and I might be lacking some of that in my own sentence. So I can give that feedback and really allow the student to think deeper. We also want to make sure that we're not overcorrecting or annotating everything. Let students do the cognitive work. If we're just giving them every single thing that they need to correct, they might not be able to catch those errors for themselves. And so we really have to think about how we can give them good feedback and think about how they might be able to learn from it and maybe catch some mistakes on their own as well. We also want to give them that time. So when we're thinking about giving them that feedback and being really intentional with the time that we give them to think it through and enact it, we really want to ensure that they have that time and they have that grace to really learn from it. If students don't have time to act on that feedback, it really has no impact. We're just telling them something and not teaching them something. So with feedback, we have to be intentional with building in time and structure and routines so they really know what they're looking for and how they should do it. There might be feedback time built into your lessons that they might be expecting it and building in that similar routine, such as read feedback, clarify the feedback with the teacher or by themselves, apply the feedback, and then possibly resubmit that work. Obviously, not all lessons might be that routinely based, but think about how we can be really practical with giving them feedback and allowing them that time, even if it's keeping up a quick pace within your lesson. We also want to break those larger tasks or chunk those tasks into different stages. Giving them feedback along the way with each individual stage is going to really help them think about, wow, I need to put in this component in place. Otherwise, if we wait till the very end, there might be so many steps that they've missed that we might not be able to build that clarity on as easy. So feedback should be more work for the student and less for the teacher, right? We're thinking about, hey, here's an element, we've taught it to you. Now, how are you going to apply it? And if they apply it correctly, What feedback do they need? And if they don't apply it correctly, are we ready to give them some feedback so they can correct it, or might it require some reteaching? So no matter what, the most important thing is thinking about how feedback only matters if students have something to do with it and if they have the time to implement it. And finally, we really want to make sure the environment invites that feedback. It needs to be supportive and psychologically safe for those students. Otherwise, the feedback becomes kind of critical and lectury and they don't feel comfortable, right? So our feedback needs to be our feedback needs to be in an effective environment that is supportive and psychologically safe. The feedback needs to be safe, supported, not judged or controlled. And we really need to communicate clearly. So when feedback is given, the students need to know that it's to help them grow. It's not to evaluate them as a person, but to help their learning. There are 3 situations where feedback can kind of backfire on the educator and for the student. When the student feels they're over monitored, then they kind of learn self-helplessness. They're not as likely to want to engage in it. They might feel, if they feel controlled instead of supported, they're not going to embed that into their learning. Or when they feel like there's unhealthy competition, right? When they're uncomfortable and they feel like they're competing with their peers, then they're not really going to learn from it. It just becomes a competition of who can get it right, which can be really defeating for the students. So as teachers, we can be transparent about why we're giving the feedback. We can normalize those mistakes as part of the learning, and we can focus on that growth and not comparison among one another. The goal is really making sure that students know that the classroom is a place to welcome feedback and to see it as a tool for improvement and not that criticism piece. So those are kind of the main elements. And so I'm going to pass it over to Jill to think about how we deliver the quality feedback.
Awesome. Thanks, Amber. All right, so great information of really breaking down those different types or those different elements of feedback, thinking about what types of feedback really work to fuel that growth. But just another important piece is that delivery, right? So how do we deliver quality feedback? And really bringing in that reminder of it's not just what we say, but how we say it. Okay, so going to that tone of voice, that body language, those facial expressions, all of those nonverbals matter just as much as the verbals. So just a nice reminder here about really thinking about that tone of voice and how much of an impact it can really have when we're providing that feedback as well. Some different considerations for feedback. We just kind of have a few outlined. Again, not an exhaustive list by any means, but some things to really kind of think about or to consider when we're kind of breaking down feedback. So we want to be sure to identify whatever it is that goal is or the skill that we're working towards. So what is it? And ensure that we have identified that. We want to be sure to also observe those errors promptly. So we talked about kind of like that immediate feedback piece, right? We want it to be timely. So we want to ensure that we're really kind of providing that information on those errors in a prompt manner. We want to deliver that feedback immediately. So we want to also, with that feedback though, like we were talking about earlier, we want to ensure that we're highlighting the strengths. So bringing in like, hey, these are some really great things going on, but then also bringing in, these are some steps moving forward. We want to provide a model or some type of guide to really kind of help correct or lead that response as well. Providing that modeling is a great opportunity or great consideration when we're thinking about feedback. We want to check for understanding, provide lots of different opportunities for practice, and be sure to reinforce that success as well. Okay, that reinforcement, again, a huge piece of feedback. And then monitoring the progress and then making those adjustments as needed. So again, just a few kind of think abouts when we're kind of outlining those considerations for feedback. The other piece that we want to bring in is that UDL lens. So how can we really utilize UDL and bring that into how we're providing feedback? So we've broken it down by those multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and then multiple means of action and expression. And again, just kind of providing some different examples through that UDL lens here. So for the first one, that multiple means of engagement, we could be thinking about providing that verbal praise maybe during discussion. Maybe it's that written feedback on, more digital assignments. So providing some written feedback there. Maybe it's those visual cues or a variety of different rubrics that kind of highlight what those strengths are and then outlining those next steps. In that purple box there, so those multiple means of representation. So some things to think about there. Maybe it's modeling that feedback aloud. So something like, hey, I noticed how you used the strategy that we practiced, and continuing on from there. Maybe it's providing some exemplars with annotated feedback as well. And then lastly, that multiple means of action and expression. Maybe a couple examples could be providing that feedback really tailored to student choice. Okay, so bringing in that spoken feedback for oral presentations, that written feedback for more written products. So again, just wanted to bring in thinking about feedback really through that UDL lens there as well. And then kind of a just aha or maybe a little takeaway here is thinking about how we might utilize something like a feedback menu. How might we provide this to our students, again, maybe even our staff, to get some information on how they like to receive feedback? How would you like to get feedback on this assignment? How would you like to get feedback on this project? Maybe it's through written comments is their preference. Maybe it's through a quick conference. Maybe it's providing some different examples or doing some modeling, or maybe it's some audio feedback. You might switch up maybe some of those choices within that feedback menu, but a great way to kind of give that student voice and choice as well when we're thinking about that feedback and what their preference is.
Okay, it's my turn. I'm going to speak. Jill kind of talked a little bit about the tone and the different ways that we bring ourselves to the table when we're offering feedback with our nonverbal communication. So I'm going to speak a little bit more to those verbal statements that we utilize when providing effective feedback for our students. So we'll start off with effective statements, which if you've gone through restorative practices, you might be somewhat familiar with the concept of effective statements. But this is really just a language and a way that we talk about behavior, but not about the person. So taking away the blame and the shaming that sometimes happens when we are attempting to provide feedback on different behaviors that we see in our classrooms. So this is also an opportunity to model to our students how they can speak about behavior and how they can reinforce positive actions and the things that we want to see more of. So it's kind of a language shift when we think about effective statements. But the most important part when we think about this is really identifying how do we remove or separate the deed from the doer when we're communicating feedback to take away that blame or shame and entering into that toxic cycle of shaming culture in our schools. So when we think about effective statements, we shift into two different ways of identifying what types of statements we're going to utilize. So we're thinking about those behaviors we want to see more of. So behaviors that are in alignment with our values or expectations that we've identified in our school. So thinking about that, we would initially, and anytime we're utilizing an effective statement or feedback, it's so important to make sure that you're identifying your student by their name. Utilizing somebody's name is one way of building connection and increasing the likelihood that you're going to have a positive relationship. So making sure that you start off your feedback, especially in this effective statement model, by clearly identifying who you're speaking to. So identifying them by name. In alignment behaviors, we want to first focus on how that behavior is making us feel, making impacting the temperature of the classroom, the overall feeling that is coming from it, positive always. And then thinking about if we can't identify a feeling that doesn't create the perception that behaviors impact our own emotional response, then we want to think about utilizing a word of affirmation. So we do want to make sure that we are not communicating with children that their behaviors impact the way we feel and that they're responsible for our emotions. So we really want to make sure that we're communicating that clearly. So thinking about that feeling or word of affirmation, if identifying a feeling makes that kind of sketchy or challenging for you, you can always lean into a word of affirmation. So identify who, share your feeling or word of affirmation, and then we want to identify that specific behavior that we want to see more of. So we want to label the behavior and then connect it to that value or agreement. Why does it matter? What is, again, the feeling or the impact that happens because this behavior occurred? So we have a couple of examples. I'll read the second one. Heather, I'm so proud of you for using your cool down strategy that we've been learning in class. When you use this strategy, you help keep yourself and others safe. I would love to see you use your strategy again. This sometimes when we use examples, those are a little bit long. So just kind of play with these things and see what it sounds like in your language. If these are just examples that we utilize, but we each can adapt it to our own personality type and our own language. So then we move into behaviors that are out of alignment with the values, and this kind of changes up the way that we confront or address our students and respond to the behaviors. So again, like I said before, we always want to identify our students by their name to ensure that we're building that connection to start off. Now, as you can see in this format, we're going to go right to that value or agreement. And the reason that we go straight to the value or agreement is because it's likely that the students are going to become less defensive. So the values or agreements are agreed upon by everyone. It's something that the student should have hopefully participated in, has learned those expectations and values, and is communicated often in your classroom. So going straight to the value as opposed to the behavior kind of takes down that wall of defensiveness right from the start as you're addressing the behavior. Next up, we are going to label and talk specifically to the behavior that we want to see changed. And then going into the impact. Why does it matter? What happened? Was someone harmed? Is there impact in the community? What exactly happened in that moment? Why does it matter? And then we go into what we call our do with moment. So what are we going to do to help our students? How are we going to come alongside our students to ensure that we have a replacement behavior? Maybe that's just helping them identify the behavior. Maybe we're giving them guidance on what we would like to see next. But we're coming together with our students to come up with something different. Rather than doing it to them or for them, we're helping come up with a strategy together. So the example we have here, again, we're gonna pick on Heather. Heather, in our classroom, we value safety. When you're throwing pencils at the ceiling, you risk a pencil injuring you or your classmates. Please keep your pencil on your desk. Thank you. So when we're thinking about this one, again, when you look at that orange piece, we're not talking about the feeling. We're talking about somebody could get hurt. It's not, you really make me mad. I'm angry that this is happening. We're not putting that behavior and placing the responsibility of the student's behavior on our emotional impact. So thinking about just talking about what the impact was in the classroom or what could potentially happen, as opposed to going straight to that feeling. So that's kind of the really quick version of effective statements. Definitely encourage if you're interested in more. We have some resources at the end, and we do cover that in restorative practices training. This quote just kind of summarizes up what we're thinking of when we're thinking about feedback. So the difference between okay and effective feedback is often just a little more specificity and a clear next step. So again, making sure that the students really know what is expected of them and we're communicating that clearly. One of the common themes we talk about at NeMTSS is clear is kind. So when we're providing feedback, we really want to make sure that we are clear and we summarize things very effectively for our students. We're just going to cover very quickly a couple more strategies or ways to think about feedback. These are just kind of clever little ways to remember. So we thought they would be fun to kind of give you some different ideas to kind of remember the different ways of providing feedback. So the glow, grow, GO strategy. I was afraid I was going to tongue twist that up. GLOW is let's talk about what's working. Then give an opportunity to talk about what might need attention. And then GO is that next strategy. So very similar in the ways of the effective language. I would encourage if you're doing GLOW, GROW, GO, that you still utilize student's name and can kind of pull this in and align this with the same kind of strategies of utilizing that effective language. So it's all very, very similar, just worded differently. And this is just kind of a little more fun because it's catchy, a little catchy phrase. The RISE model of effective feedback, this is also just another one that might be easier for you to remember. So RISE is the acronym that we use for reflect. So reflecting on what's happening, inquiring as to why or what's happening, making some suggestions, and then elevating our students. So again, just another model that you can look into. We do have links in our Padlet that further explain each of these models that you can go in to read and explore it just a little bit more. But this is just another model that we wanted to share with everyone as a way to try to remember effective feedback strategies. And then the final one that we're going to talk about is the tag feedback. So this one, all of these are great for student and adults, but we explicitly liked this one specific for teacher feedback. So the tag model talks about tell something you notice, ask a question, and give a suggestion. So again, the examples here, I noticed you explained your thinking clearly. What made you choose that strategy? Could you try labeling your next steps? So maybe that additional step is a little bit more clarity on labeling what's happening next. So the tag is just another, again, acronym. We love acronyms in education, so why not put it on feedback strategies? But if one of these is catchy and it's something that you feel like is going to help you remember how to communicate effectively and provide good feedback to your students, we encourage you to latch on and take it. Now, jumping into resources, I talked about in effective statements that we have some resources. Our team at NeMTSS has created some visual reminders that you can take. They're free. You can just click on the slide deck, or you can get those all in the Padlet, or even on our NeMTSS website under resources. You can get these different pieces of information. The one on the left is those effective statements that really kind of builds it out. You can keep it in your classroom as a reminder. And then we've got on the right side some feedback sentence stems that might just help you with identifying some ideas of ways that you might shift your language when you're in certain scenarios with your students. And as we start wrapping things up, we do have an exit survey. We would ask anyone in attendance to please fill out the exit survey so we can continue to meet your needs. We do review all of our feedback that we receive and try to continue to build our content based on feedback. And then this also gives us the announcement of our next Coffee Connect, which will be August 19th. And the topic for that one is high expectations and doing with. So setting those high expectations and how do we walk alongside of our students. This is your save the date for all of next year's Coffee Connect. So November 4th, February 10th, May 5th, August 25th. You can go ahead and register for all 4 of them within that link. And you'll just get calendar reminders. Again, if you can't make it to all 4, these are recorded and uploaded on the NeMTSS website. So feel free to access those resources there as well in our media library. And then we're excited to share with you our Nebraska MTSS Summit 2026. The theme is Destination Impact. And thinking about turning MTSS systems into literacy-driven student outcomes. We've had the opportunity to look at some of the breakout session proposals, and I will tell you this is going to be an incredible summit. Again, the dates are October 8th and 9th. Mark your calendar, register. As soon as registration's open, it's going to be a great event. Again, that's going to be held at the Eunice Conference Center in Kearney, as it always is, and we hope to see you there. And then for our optimistic closure today, we're just going to give you the opportunity to self-reflect and think about what is one small step you can take tomorrow to make your feedback more specific, more actionable, and more growth focused. And with that, we appreciate you joining us for our Spring Coffee Connect this year, and we look forward to seeing you in future trainings or Coffee Connects. Thanks, everyone.